This year marks the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation. So we've been doing Protestant Christianity for 500 years, believe it or not, which started, most theologians and historians would say it began with Martin Luther stapling his 95 Theses to the door at the Wittenberg Chapel, which was 500 years ago. And so as he's doing this, Luther realizes he's got some grievances against the church. The church has all the power, and they're taking people's money. They're not concerned about what God is doing in people's lives. They're more concerned about the selling of indulgences. Maybe you've heard about some of this. So Luther decides that his whole platform, because God's calling him to do this, is to preach a message that salvation comes by grace through faith. And he believes so strongly in that he's willing to go up against the church. And in those days, the church was ruled by the state. So he's really not just going up against the church. He's putting himself into harm's way because he's doing what God has called him to do. So he posts these 95 Theses to the door, and sure enough, he gets in trouble for it. So it took the church and the state a couple of years. They finally they hold a diet, which is a council, a trial, and they bring Luther in, and they tell him to recant or he's going to be put to death. And Luther says, well, give me 24 hours to pray about it and think about it. He goes off. The next day, Luther comes back and offers these prophetic words to the court. He says this: I cannot and will not recant anything. For to go against conscience is neither right nor safe. Here I stand. I can do no other. So help me God. Amen. Luther had a choice to make. His choice that he chose was to do the right thing, even when it was the hard thing. To do what was right, to do what God was calling him to do, even when that was the most difficult thing for him. As we've made our way through the story, we've seen character after character make a decision to follow God, even when it's the most difficult thing, even when it's the hard thing to do. Right? We saw it happen with Abraham. God calls Abraham to leave behind the place where he's grown up, the place where he's familiar, where his family is, the place that he knows. God calls Abraham to go, to do the hard thing, even though it's difficult. It's the right thing to do, so Abraham leaves. God calls Moses the same way. Moses is out in the desert trying to be off by himself, and God says, no, I need you to go and rescue my people in Egypt. Even though that's the most difficult thing, Moses says, all right, I'm going to go and do what God is calling me to do, because that's the right thing to do. And last week, we saw Gideon do the exact same thing. God's calling him to do something that's difficult. God's calling him to do something that's challenging. But Gideon says, I only have 300 people. How can I possibly defeat the mighty Midianites? God says, this is the right thing to do. It's what I'm calling you to do. And so Gideon makes a choice to do the right thing, even when it's difficult. We see an example of that today. We pick up the story of Ruth having to make a decision. Is she going to do the right thing and stay with her mother-in-law, or is she going to choose the easy way out? Now, the backstory on this, to me, is really fascinating, because it really is a difficult decision that Ruth has to make. This is certainly no easy decision for her. So Naomi was forced to flee Bethlehem. She was living in the promised land. She was living in the place that God had promised God's people for 500 years. They're finally there, but a famine comes. And so Naomi flees Bethlehem to a region of Moab where she can find food. And while she's there, she finds her husband, and they have kids. Time goes by, her husband passes away, and then her 2 sons pass away. So here's Naomi, a widow, having to deal with the loss of her husband in a land that she's not familiar with, and then has to deal with the loss of her sons, still in a land that she's not familiar with. So she approaches her 2 daughters-in-law. She says, I want what's best for you. I want you to do what's best for you and your family. I want you to go back and live with your parents. Right? Your parents are still living. We've lost everything, but there's no reason for you to continue on with me. You need to go back to your family. So here's the choice that these 2 daughters-in-law have. They can go back to a life of safety, a life of security, to live with their parents, or they can choose to be with Naomi. A choice that's difficult. Choice of the unknown. A choice of a future that they have no idea what is getting ready to happen. Orpah, one of the daughters-in-law, chooses to go back with her family. Ruth has a choice to make. And we're going to let Janet tell us what happens.
But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to abandon you, to turn back from following after you. Wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do this to me and more, so even death separates me from you." When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her about it.
This is a remarkable choice that Ruth has made. She chooses the unknown. She chooses the path of most resistance. She chooses to do what's right, even when that's the most difficult thing for her to do. She chooses a relationship over what might be her safety and her security. She chooses to value what's important to God because she knows that here is her mother-in-law in a time of need who needs her help. So when I look at this story, I see the value of a relationship here. And I think oftentimes we make choices in our lives where we have to choose whether or not we are going to stay in that relationship or whether we are going to leave. Oftentimes it seems like the easiest decision for us to make is to leave. Oftentimes it seems like the best decision for us is to walk away, when perhaps the right thing to do in that relationship is to stay, to reconcile, to restore the relationship. Oftentimes it might seem like a quick fix to walk away, but maybe God's calling us in these relationships to do the difficult thing. Maybe God's calling us in those relationships to stay, even when it's a hard thing to do. Now, I realize that there are certain times in a relationship where it's perfectly acceptable to leave. And in fact, I would encourage you to really think about those. If you are in any sort of relationship that's abusive, emotionally or physically, it's okay to get out. As soon as it's a safe time for you to do so, right? We would love to help you get out of that relationship. That is not God's plan for you to stay. But far too often, we take the quick fix and we say, well, it's just easier for me if I get out of this, if I walk away. When in fact, God might be saying to us today, you know what, the most difficult thing for us to do is to stay in that, even if it's the right thing to do. We have choices all the time, sisters and brothers. It's not just in our relationships. Oftentimes there's a quick fix and we want to take that because it seems like the right thing to do. But what if today God is calling us to take the long route, the difficult way, to grow where we're planted, to put down roots where we are, so that God can use us when we stay, when it will be far easier to leave. Now, I'm not saying that we should stay when it's hard or when it's difficult, hoping that God is somehow going to bless us because we stayed, because we did the hard thing. In fact, in our story today, even when Ruth chooses to stay with Naomi, her mother-in-law, it gets way worse before it gets better. They go back to Bethlehem. And while they're there, they have to go back to Bethlehem and find themselves in a position lower than the slaves. The landowners in Bethlehem in those days set aside food for their slaves to eat. But when Naomi and Ruth go back to Bethlehem, they don't even have food to eat. They have to wait around in the fields until after the slaves have eaten. They have to wait around and pick up whatever's left over. They find themselves in a worse situation than when they left. The quick fix sometimes might seem easier. Staying might seem easier, but it doesn't mean that God's necessarily going to bless us because we do the right thing. We do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, regardless of the consequences. Even if our situation gets worse. That, brothers and sisters, is an act of obedience, an act of abiding in the vine. Following through with what God is calling us to do so that we can, in fact, live the lives that God wants us to live. There's a parallel story to this one in the New Testament where the disciples have to make a choice whether to leave or to stay. It comes from John 6, right? We see Jesus feeding the 5,000. One of the more powerful miracles that Jesus performs recorded in all the New Testament. Jesus takes a little bit of bread and some fish and multiplies it so that over 5,000 people were fed, and it's remarkable. And then Jesus goes off and finds some solitude. He has to get away from the crowds. And the next day, the crowds show back up. They show back up in part because they're hungry, in part because they're curious. They had seen Jesus perform this miracle, and so they're like, hey, what is this about? Maybe if we follow Jesus around for a minute, he can teach us something about what it means to be a follower of God. But the crowds show back up. And so Jesus continues to teach about what it means to be his follower, what it means to abide, what it means to follow along with him. And so at first the teaching is somewhat normal. Jesus says, well, you are following me because you're hungry. Maybe you're looking for a miracle. But those who eat the bread, they're going to be hungry again. But those who feast on me, the bread of life, those people will never be hungry again. The crowds are like, all right, I'm okay with that. I can get on board with Jesus' teaching here about being the bread of life. But then it gets super weird, and it gets super weird and fast. Jesus says, not just eating the bread of life, but if you want to be a follower of me, you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And at that, the crowds are like, please, Jesus. Let's get out of here. And one by one, sure enough, they start filing out right there. That was the deal breaker for the crowds. When Jesus mentions eating his flesh and drinking his blood, they didn't even stick around and let Jesus explain what he meant by it. That was the deal breaker. And they start walking away. Jesus sees this. He sees the crowd going away. Of course, Jesus didn't do things for the sake of the crowd. Jesus did the right thing because it was the right thing to do. So he turns to his disciples. And he says, y'all going to leave too? Crowds are gone. Are y'all going to leave too? And Peter jumps in. Peter's like, Jesus, I think I'm going to stay, but, you might want to tone down the teaching on the eating of your flesh and drinking of your blood, because that got a little weird. But his disciples had a choice to make in those moments. Were they going to stay and do the right thing because it was the right thing to do? Or were they going to be like the crowds and walk away when the times got tough? The crowds took the quick fix. The crowds chose to leave when it got tough. Here's what Peter actually says. Lord, where would we go? You have the words of eternal life. We believe and know that you are God's holy One. Peter and the disciples chose to stay. They chose to do the right thing even when it was tough. They had caught a glimpse that Jesus was getting ready to die, and they made a choice that day that they were going to be followers of Jesus. And no matter where Jesus was leading them, they decided to stay. They decided to do the right thing, even when it was difficult, even when it was the hard thing to do. Sure enough, it gets worse. It gets harder for them to follow Jesus. Jesus goes from there. And a few days later, he's arrested. And as Jesus is arrested, his disciples have another choice to make. Are we still going to follow Jesus when it gets tough? Are we still going to be all in? Are we going to make the right choices even when this is incredibly difficult for us to make? So, brothers and sisters, we have a choice. Jesus is inviting us to be his followers. Jesus is inviting us to abide, to remain, to stay. Jesus is inviting us to be obedient. The choice is up to us whether we want to remain in God's love. Jesus then gathers his disciples together in what must have been an incredibly difficult meal to have. Jesus knowing that some would choose to leave. Jesus even knowing that there was one sitting at the table who would abandon him. There was one who took the quick fix of money to sell Jesus out. But Jesus gathers them all there together anyway because it's Jesus' table and it's Jesus who does the inviting. And he takes the bread. He says, "This is my body. Those who want to follow me, they have to eat my flesh," Jesus says. And he breaks the bread and gives thanks and gives it to his disciples and says, "Do this in remembrance of me." When the supper was over, Jesus took the cup. He gave thanks. He said, "Those that want to follow me have to drink my blood. Even when this is a tough teaching, do this in remembrance of me." This is offered for the forgiveness of sins. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. Let us pray. Almighty and gracious God, we give you thanks for loving us in an abiding way, in a never giving up way, that even when we turn from you, your love for us remains steadfast. Even when we take the quick fix, even when we make decisions to pull ourselves away from you, your love never pulls itself away from us. You continue the act of grace, the act of wooing us, the act of wanting to be in a loving relationship with us and wanting us to abide in your love. So as we come to this table today, we ask that you would allow us to make this an act of love. Allowing us to do the right thing, even when it's the difficult thing. We pray your anointing over this meal, that this bread and juice would become for us the body and the blood of Christ, so that we might be for the world the body of Christ, redeemed by his blood. So make us one. One in abiding love with you. One in abiding love with our neighbor until Christ comes in final victory. We celebrate at his banquet table. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, we pray. Amen. If you've not been with us throughout Lent, we have taken on the spiritual discipline of having communion weekly during this season of Lent as we anticipate the resurrection. It's a reminder to us that God's love is available to all of us. The table is open to all of us. And indeed, we found the biggest table that we could find because we believe that there is a place for all people at this table in this holy meal. We've all come from many different places and backgrounds, but around this table we're one. We call ourselves children of God. We're here to give thanks for the grace and the love of Jesus Christ. Sisters and brothers, this is the table of grace. It's a place where we expect to encounter God's grace available to all. Is grace small? No. Grace that is small is not grace. We believe in the bigness of God's grace. This is the table of love. It's a place where we expect to encounter God's love available to all. Does love have limits? No. Love that has limits is not love. We believe in love without limits. Who is welcome at this table? All are welcome. All who wish to encounter God's love and grace. This is Christ's table that has long been set. And there has always been a place reserved for you. So come. We would invite several people who feel led today to come help us serve communion. We want this to be a participatory act, so we encourage you